This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair.
And this is Allison Dickson of the Vintage Villains podcast.
And this is a true crime bonus episode. This is the third part of our series on the disappearance of Christina White and the Lewis-Clark Valley serial killer. In our last two episodes, we walked you through the mysterious April 1979 disappearance of 12-year-old Christina White from Asotin, Washington, on the day of the town's fair. It's a mystery that more than 45 years later has not been solved, at least to the satisfaction of anyone who wants justice for the victims. We also showed you how law enforcement has honed in on a prime suspect, a man named Lance Voss, who lived down the street from Christina and eventually became the stepfather of Christina's close friend, Rose. We also walked you through how the first real clues about a solid suspect in Christina's case came from nothing that happened in Asotin, but 7 miles away at 805 6th Avenue in Lewiston, Idaho, where in September 1982, 21-year-old Christina Nelson, 18-year-old Brandy Miller, and 35-year-old Stephen Parasol went missing from the Lewiston Civic Theater while Voss was there. Miller and Nelson were found dead 2 years later on an embankment off a road in a rural area 35 miles from the theater near Kendrick, Idaho. Parasol is still missing. We walked you through how Voss said he heard nothing that night. He also denied abducting Christina, although law enforcement officials would say that he later said he provided her with a washcloth to cool herself just before she disappeared. That's something that his stepson, Clint, later said did not happen. We walked you through how the disappearances were later suspected to be related to the 1981 disappearance and murder of 22-year-old University of Idaho student Kristen David, who appears to have been abducted in late June of 1981 while riding her bicycle from Moscow, Idaho to Clarkston, Washington, Lewiston's sister city just on the other side of the Snake River. We also talked about how Kristen David, like Brandy Miller, Stephen Parasol, Christina Nelson, and Lance Voss, all had connections to the Civic Theater. We also talked about the 1987 death by suicide of Claudette Viola, another member of the theater who was Lance's mistress while he was married to Patricia Brennan. Lance found the body. Today we're joined by Cathy Belben and Samantha Sawyer, researchers from the Snake River podcast, which we talked to you all about in the first two episodes. Cathy and Sam have conducted some amazing research along with the host of the podcast, Brandon Schrand, that we mentioned in the first two episodes. And we're so grateful for the two of you to join. I could sit here and sing your praises all day long, but I'm going to let you sing some of your own praises. So we'll go ahead and get started with Cathy. If you want to introduce yourself, that would be awesome.
Sure. I'm Cathy Belben, and I've been working for the Snake River Killer podcast for I guess just about 2 years. I first contacted Brandon because I was a listener, and I was interested, like a lot of people are, in the classified ads, and contacted him with some things that I thought I'd found. And we got talking, and soon enough, it just made sense for me to join the team. I've spent my life teaching high school. I teach English and psychology, including forensic psychology. And of course, I'm fascinated by all things true crime and by the legal process overall.
Excellent.
All right. I'm Samantha Sawyer. I'm a graphic designer and photographer by trade. But I got kind of involved with the Snake River Killer podcast. Like Cathy, I messaged Brandon, kind of sending him some things I noticed about some of the classified ads. We got to talking about how we could kind of partner up to do some merchandise sales and stuff like that for the podcast. And somewhere along the line, it turned into me doing research. So it's been really fun. I've always been interested in true crime, but I would say my real kind of obsessions with it started during the pandemic. And so I'm really, excited to be in this space, and I'm happy to be part of podcasts and part of different shows that, work with victim advocacy and, telling those stories.
Awesome.
This is what I really love about the true crime podcasting community, is how it really brings together the hosts and, the show creators with audience members who have an active interest in a lot of these elements, and, helping to grow the show and make it, more interesting or more meaningful, or just, more informative through the audience feedback and participation. It's just, I've seen it happen, here with the Snake River Killer podcast. I see it on the prosecutors. I see it with Jason's show. And I even had a lot of it with my shows. So this is just awesome. I love having you here to talk
and they're
about
real actual communities. That's what you're kind of getting at, Allison, because Cathy has been on before for our listeners episode last year. In my episode on Ghost Grief and Love by Chris Sousse, Sam did the art for it. So many of the people who are part of our podcast communities contribute, bringing us story ideas and doing research and, fighting to support victims and their families and find justice. And it's so cool to be able to do something together as a community.
Yeah. And before we continue on with everything, again, we want to give shout outs and credit to, again, the Snake River Killer podcast is such an important source for what we're talking about right now. That and also the documentaries Confluence and Cold Valley. And Cathy mentioned one earlier before we got on live. People Investigates also did an episode on this topic, and I believe those run on Max or Hulu. It's one of those two, because I was just watching some.
I know you can buy the People Investigates episodes on Prime Video, which is where I've watched.
Oh, great. And that's where I've watched these as well. And of course, Detective Jackie Nichols and Gloria Crow Boberts, who have also done so much incredible investigation into this case. But before we get started with more questions and answers and everything with you two, we wanted to share some additional biographical information about Lance with the audience. And of course, bring everybody up to snuff so we're all on the same page when we start asking questions. Also, as we mentioned in the last episode, Lance was one of 3 serious suspects in the 1963 murder of 8-year-old Diane Taylor in Chicago. Diane was abducted after leaving a YMCA where she was in a day camp and where Lance was a counselor. The 2 boys would later say that Lance was the last person seen with Diane, whose battered and slashed body was found in an alley in a Chicago neighborhood. We also mentioned the strange 1972 death by drowning of Antoinette Anino. According to most accounts, Antoinette killed herself, but on that same night, Lance was arrested lurking outside the Willow Glen mortuary where her body was, and where he was trying to break in with a 12-inch knife, a flashlight, and a camera. He told the officer who arrested him that he was going to see his girlfriend one last time. He was later charged and convicted despite giving the officer a fake address. And then in August of 1973, Voss married his first wife in California. One story that Gloria heard from Voss's first wife years later was that one time when she asked him to clean the dishes, he grabbed the dishes, took them up into the hills, and shot them instead of cleaning them. Well, I guess that's one way to do it there. The next year, in 1974, Voss divorced his first wife and 1 year later married his second wife and moved to Melba, Idaho, about 200 miles south of the Lewis-Clark Valley. There, Voss worked at a Circle K grocery store and at a seed plant and buying company. In 1977, Voss attended classes at Boise State University before moving to the Lewis-Clark Valley in 1978. That would be 1 year before Christina White's disappearance. And after a year of living in Lewiston, Voss moved to Asotin, where in 1979, he bought his own home, began dating and living with Patricia Brennan, and by April, Christina White had disappeared. And at the time of when Christina disappeared, Voss was employed as a mechanic at Omark Industries, a maker of precision cutting tools. The Omark plant was located at 2299 Snake River Avenue in Lewiston. The Omark plant closed in 1985 and is now a Superfund site. Lance eventually found his way to the Lewis-Clark Valley, where he became an active in the theater. He met Rose and Clint's mom, Patricia, and dated her for a bit before marrying her. In 1988, after the disappearances and murders of the Lewis-Clark Valley, Voss began taking classes 45 miles north at Washington State University in Pullman. Soon after, he's at a party with a local patrolman where he asks about the cases of Christy, Brandy, and Stephen, according to the Snake River Killer podcast. In the early 90s, Voss graduated from WSU, and investigators ask Voss to sit down for another interview, and he agrees, but this time he retains an attorney. Then Voss refused the interview and polygraph, and his attorney had no interest in speaking to investigators anymore, and that any attempted contact would be considered harassment. Voss threatened to sue the police. Investigators ran a voice stress analysis, and the analyst believes Voss was indicating deception and knowledge of the case. Make of that what you will. Years later, Voss's attorney, who has since died, said Lance Voss was one of the most unsettling individuals he had ever met, and he believed that he had been responsible for the murders in the Lewis-Clark Valley. In 1993, the police publicly ruled Stephen Pearsall out as a suspect. In many respects, law enforcement naturally viewed him as someone who could be responsible because he disappeared on the same night. And friends told them that Pearsall attempted to appear to be a gender and asexual orientation minority, or somewhere on the asexual spectrum.
In 1998, Voss is again interviewed by investigators about the disappearances, as well as by a task force looking into several linked killings in Spokane, Washington. Voss agrees to give his DNA, but only for the purposes of ruling him out in the Spokane killings. A month later, the police say he is no longer a suspect in the Spokane killings. In 2000 and 2001, Patricia Brennan and Voss began selling their properties in Washington State and began registering to vote in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. In 2001, the Lewiston police chief and the Asotin County Sheriff's Office say they asked for an outside review of the cases. In 2002, Voss declared bankruptcy in North Carolina, seeking Chapter 13 reorganization. But as a part of that, he was forced to sell, which we'll go over in a moment, the Dome House in Clarkston, Washington. Between 2003 and 2007, several areas and homes linked to Voss were searched with ground-penetrating radar. At one point, Detective Nichols collected a horse that had died from a local vet and dropped it in the Snake River to simulate where Christina's body may have gone. The investigators in this case have been unbelievably tireless, and that's just one of many examples. In 2011, the documentary Confluence was released. In 2012, a 16-year-old girl named Kayla Campbell drowned in a pond near where Voss lived at the time in Mint Hill, North Carolina. Voss was brought in for questioning by the police in North Carolina and the FBI. Eventually, that death was ruled an accident, but we know at the moment the FBI, both in Lewiston, North Carolina, and other places, are actively investigating Voss. And in fact, Allison, I don't know if I told you this, but when I took my trip to Lewiston in 2023, and I was staying at a hotel, it was a Holiday Inn that happened to be right across from the residence, they call it resident agency. It's like the regional field office of the FBI under a larger field office. They were interviewing people right then that week related to the case, right across from my hotel. In 2018, the documentary Cold Valley is released. As a part of the investigation, a couple of other disturbing instances come up. Gloria links Voss to the 1968 kidnapping and murder of an 8-year-old girl named Diane Taylor, who was abducted and held for several days before being dumped in the alley behind houses in Chicago. After Gloria contacted the Chicago Police Department, they reopened the investigation and exhumed Diane from her grave. Gloria was able to find out that Lance at the time was one of 3 serious suspects in the case. Investigators also discovered an account of a real estate agent who says she had a strange encounter with Voss, who also had a real estate license while he was in Lewiston and Clarkston. He contacted her to sell his home on 3rd Street in Asotin. That's the home he was not living in that we talked about in the first 2 episodes. He insisted on showing her the basement. And when they were walking through the house, she turned around and noticed he had something in his hand and was ready to strike her. Voss put the item down, she said, and asked how many people knew she was there. And she told him, quite smartly, several people. He suddenly lost interest in showing her the basement. Cement work was done on the basement by Voss at some point. Law enforcement dug up the floor in the basement and cadaver dogs were brought in. It's unknown what, if anything, was found during that search. So I think that covers, Allison, most of the background we wanted to throw in about Voss. Anything else you want to throw in before we dive in with Cathy and Sam?
No, I think that covers the gamut pretty well, and I'm sure more will come up as we talk to these 2 here.
So one of the things, Sam, Cathy, I want to throw out to you, I'm very tempted to dive right into the case, but I feel like so many times when we do stories like this, it's really easy to just sort of jump into the suspect and the crimes, and we don't talk a lot about the victims. And I think it does a disservice to a lot of true crime podcasts. One, we're missing out on it's the reason why, at least I care about these cases, is it's the valuable human lives that we lost and the impact on families. But I also think an important part of understanding any crime, particularly an officially unsolved crime, is understanding the victimology too. But I really wanted to just start asking you guys a little bit about going back to Diane Taylor and Antoinette and Nino. What do we know about the victims, their personalities, and their lives before they either died or disappeared?
Sam, do you want to start?
Sure, I can. I know at least with Antoinette and Nino, she was very involved with her high school theater group. She was, more of an artsy type student. I believe there was even a photo of her in the paper passing out programs for the high school. Can't remember if it was a play or a musical that they were doing. So she was also part of the photography club. And had an interest in photography and cameras, and I think other than that, she was just probably a bright, vivacious, bubbly California teen.
Right. How about Diane? Do you guys know much about Diane Taylor? She was only 8 years old, so it's so much of life.
It's really hard to
right?
say. She was an only child. And so some people do attribute her to being someone who was kind of attention seeking, not in a negative way, but just, wanted to be around people and wanted to be friendly with people. She grew up in I believe it was the Austin neighborhood of Chicago. Yeah. And I think by all accounts was just kind of a bit of a, kind of a latchkey kid at the time, and, spent the time that she could at the YMCA and other times, at home or with friends. But like you said, she was only 8 years old. So
yeah, it's so funny. So much of what I've read about her was on the day she disappeared, but she had so much personality. It sounded like when she went to the candy store with her friends or was bouncing around the YMCA. But I got a kick out of the fact that the last known thing she did was kick a boy in the shin. I was like,
it. Yeah, she had a spicy personality, it sounded like. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think that's also, again, the other part of that only child, mentality probably is like, I'm in charge here, buddy. But yeah, she really seemed like a fun, an interesting little girl. But it's interesting too. I'm noticing like what seems to connect all of these people when we look at Kristen David, Brandy Miller, Christina Nelson, and Stephen Pearsall. Maybe, well, I don't know about Christina White. She's a little different in this aspect, but they all seem to be connected by the arts in some way, which I find pretty fascinating. And I don't know if that's intentional. I don't know if that's something I would ask. I would ask Julia maybe in the next episode, but curious if that's something that stuck out to you too a lot.
Definitely. And I think that I'm not sure that it would have explained Lance's behavior, except that all of these victims were people that he probably knew, which I think is interesting, with the exception of Antoinette. But then again, we don't know for sure. Like Sam pointed out, there is a picture of her in the paper folding programs for her high school play, and a good possibility that the suspect had seen that, or even attended plays, or somehow been connected in a way that we just haven't uncovered. I've never give up on trying to find connections between the victims and Lance, because I do think, and that's one reason why I think it's so important that we continue to tell the story, is that I think there are people out there that with enough encouragement might come forward and reveal things that haven't been exposed yet. For example, Jason, you mentioned that Lance attended Washington State University. I was there at the same time.
Oh, wow.
I graduated from Wazoo in 1990, and Lance would have been there. We would have overlapped by at least a year. Now, I don't remember him, but someone might. When Brandon went back to the library, he spoke with a librarian there who did remember him and recalled his behavior. We know that we know he was interested in photography. And at the time, this was pre-cell phones, of course, so people weren't snapping their pics on their smartphones. They were hiring these guys that we called the picture guy. And sometimes it was a woman, but they would come to fraternity parties, right? And take rolls and rolls and rolls of film that people who attended the party could later look at proofs and order pictures. Yeah. So one thing I've often wondered was, could he have been employed by one of those companies and attended parties?
Right, because, and also interesting too, that Antoinette Anino had the interest in photography and was in her photography club.
Right.
And that is interesting indeed.
And it's also known that Lance, and there is a picture that exists of him participating in one of the WSU music groups. I can't remember if it was a band or symphony. And again, I think that with enough encouragement, there may be people who remember him. And just a matter of getting people to talk and share things. Someone somewhere might say the right thing, that not even realizing that they're revealing something that's elemental to one of these cases.
Yeah.
I may be overly optimistic about that, but I honestly think that, like Jason said, one of the beauties, and you pointed out, one of the beauties of the podcasting sphere is that it is such a great way to reach people who might otherwise never speak up, might never, realize that they have information. I think about true crime bullshit and how people have come forward with information that has helped in the investigation.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why I'm involved, is I love solving problems and digging up information, because I want to find justice for these people. Christina and I are only 6 months difference in age.
Yeah.
I was a girl who rode my bicycle around the neighborhood. I had a creepy friend, a friend whose dad was creepy. And
Same.
I can relate. Yeah. Maybe we all did. But it seems.
But in that era and at that time, I feel like, we had that freedom to be out in the world and doing a lot of things. And we sort of had to be very cognizant of things like that. Is this person creepy? Do we stay, and especially around this time in the late 70s, when we're starting to come to terms with the fact that there are dangerous people in the world, that, there are predators out there, and being young and coming to terms with that is just, it's hard. I found myself kind of reflecting a lot on that with the recent Delphi case that's currently in court. and thinking to myself that those two girls lived out my worst nightmare as a kid at their age, and knowing, that Christina too.
It's just good luck. I was pretty naive as a kid, and I think it could have been me, right?
Mhm.
Would I don't know that I would have fought back. I don't know that I would have screamed. If someone's dad did something, he was a grown up. That's, so I think I really feel like just a real kinship with Christina because of our similar ages, because we grew up in that era, because like her, I was riding my bike around the neighborhood just being a kid, and luckily the bad thing didn't happen to me. And can I use what I have in terms of resources and research and intelligence to be a voice for her, because she can't be that voice anymore.
Right.
Yeah, and one of the things that's interesting to me about each of these victims in this case, that if you look at the days before they disappeared or they were murdered, you almost get the impression they didn't, even in the instances where we know their last few hours, or you get the impression that they didn't see it coming.
Right.
They weren't fearful. It wasn't, you imagine in each of these crimes, whether it's picking up Kristen David on the highway or whatever happened to Christina White, where she disappeared without screaming or a fight, or whatever got Christina Nelson or Brandy Miller into the theater, that, some amount of deceptive charm was used, or,
Oh yeah.
yeah. And it, one of the things that what I found, to your point about true crime bullshit, is, the number of people who've come forward with near misses in that case. And I actually think in this case too, a number of people have come forward because of the publicity with what could very well be near misses.
Right.
I wanted to ask both of you, given what you know about Lance, do you think that he's someone who would be capable of deceptive charm? Do you think he exhibits that personality trait to be that Svengali type?
Can I say abso-fucking-lutely? I mean,
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
Yeah.
because we know for a fact that he was literally an actor.
True. Very good point. Very good point.
So he took on the role of other people. I mean, in one play, I think he even played a killer.
Yeah, arsenic and old ladies.
He went through a period, at least in the 80s and 90s, where he was shooting off letters to the editor, and I spent a lot of time reading about those and reading some forensic linguistic stuff, and just going through, and I know Sam did this too, and just identifying how many negative and, even sometimes violent words that he used. And so I do think that he would have been capable of putting on different personas to get what he wanted. I mean, I think that's part of being a psychopath and being a narcissist, if those diagnoses applied to him, is using whatever charm or maybe anger or whatever personality characteristic gets you what you want in the moment.
Well, and certainly, Allison, to answer from my side of the fence, if you listen to some of the stories that are told about him, his interactions with people in the theater, his ability to convince a young woman there to have an affair with him when she knew he was married to somebody who was around, and that everyone else in the group would find out about it. That story of him coming up to the police officer at the party and asking about the cases, that is like very charming, high risk taking, manipulative, colorful behavior. And when you listen to him in the interrogations, and I think Sam pointed this out, that he has this like aw shucks kind of like way about him.
Yeah, didn't he say something like, "Oh, I guess I'm in trouble now," or something like that? I remember hearing
things like that. Yeah. Oh, all sorts of folks.
He literally says "golly gee."
Yes, literally says
they
"golly
ask him
gee."
something, he's like, "Golly gee, I don't know."
Right.
Oh.
And so, you see those characteristics, and I think it's easy as an outsider to look at someone like him and view them as they must walk in the room and it feels like a demon has entered. But if you have successfully, let's throw out the murders and let's say, we just know the other stories about him. If you've successfully navigated your life that far and still have people in it who are willing to let you into their clubs and their groups and their organizations, and in some cases, when you have this cloud hanging over you, you must be a charming person.
Right.
You must be a very charming person. I suspect I would probably like him if he were my neighbor.
I mean, and given too that it just seems like people in his family are willing. I mean, that's just typical of families, but you definitely don't see this family looking to turn on him either. But another thing too is like that clever audacity that he has with the newspaper classifieds. But one thing I wanted to mention too, because this was probably the part of the Snake River podcast.
Way more clever than the Dome House.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll get to the Dome House. But Brandon went over his discovery of the Notes Plus class assignment, the writing assignment that he wrote for a classroom supplemental, which we didn't talk about it much on
Allison,
here. But
that's when he was teaching a student, teaching students, right? Supplemental.
That's right. Yeah. And he set up this scenario of what is it, being able to tell what someone's like by their picture, their appearance or something. But the scenario that he wrote was so like graphically referring to him dominating and killing someone. Somebody else can explain this better than I can right now, but it was one of those revelations that was like, this man is putting himself completely out there.
Yeah. Well, there is actually, there is a theory out there, and I'm not saying anybody buys it, but it's, they believe it's a plausible theory that imagine an innocent Lance Voss who has the personality that is so apparent, still just decides I'm going to mess with everyone.
Yeah.
And I am going to put in classified ads with codes that are referenced to these things. I am going to write things that lead people down rabbit holes. Regardless of how you look at it, there's a common thread, in my opinion, of this sadistic behavior. Because even if he's not responsible for it and he's still doing these things, it's really sadistic to do it and leave this trail of clues, but to have also not done it and leave these trail of clues is still sadistic.
Agreed. It speaks to as someone who has a devious mind, that's for sure. Now, what can you tell us, Cathy or Sam? Do we know about what happened to the families of the victims? Like, where are they kind of all now, given when this all happened?
Sam, do you know?
Well, we're in a group chat with Gloria.
That's true.
So we do stay really close with Gloria. She's kind of our beacon, I would say, throughout all of this. She's kind of who I ever run my gut checks through, or anytime I'm, kind of questioning myself or, our motives, she's kind of who I talk to.
Oh, that's good.
I do know Brandon has been in some contact with Christina's sister, Carlin, and she's talked to us a little bit. Diane Taylor's sister has also talked to Brandon a little bit. But as far as other family, it seems like, or, friends or just anyone who was close to these victims, it seems like anyone who Brandon has attempted to reach out to is still just so hurt and so just not past what happened,
right,
that they're not even in, positions or in, they just can't talk about it yet.
Yeah.
It leaves a mark on generations,
I think so. And I think
Yeah,
particularly a case like this, that we're talking about a lot of unsolved cases that eventually sort of get tied together, and probably a bit of a lack of hope that they'll ever come to resolution. And so you think about it, why would you want to open up a wound that you've closed if you don't really believe it'll come to a resolution?
Yeah, that's the tough part,
Yeah.
So at the end of the last episode, we showed an image and discussed a classified ad that Jason deciphered that included the names of Christina, Kristen, Brandy, Christina, and Steven. Without using any two letters twice in a 25-word ad, you can find the words Stephen Pearsall, Miller, Nelson, David, and Christina White. And if you're on the YouTube live right now, you can see a picture of that. And I'll also have pictures of it on the Facebook and Instagram. The last names of the 3 victims whose bodies were found and the full names of the 2 who are still missing were included in this ad. Can you tell us about Lance's writings and other clues that people have latched onto? And, I'm really particularly interested in that part of the rabbit hole and sort of finding these codes that he's leaving around.
Especially since you guys were the ones who helped us figure out we should try to crack these codes. So I got to give you 2 a lot of credit for even identifying how weird some of the ads are. And I have a couple more of them up here too.
Sam, you've spent more time with the ads than I have.
Yeah, they're definitely weird. I think what's most crazy about the ads, not to go off on a tangent here, but just to kind of like calculate the amount of money alone that he would have spent on these classified ads just seems insane, because there's so many, they're so wordy, and they run for long lengths of time a lot of the time. So I think that alone kind of further proves the kind of sadisticness that you were talking about earlier, Jason, that, if this is just all a fun game for him, like he's invested a lot of money to be, kind of a sick individual.
Right.
But with the ads themselves, we find a lot of the times they kind of fall into 3 categories. It's either a vehicle ad, a lost or found pet ad, or some sort of like a pet for sale ad. But mostly what we see a lot of is vehicles and animals, mostly dogs.
Yeah, this guy's lost. We said in the first episode when you guys weren't here, this guy's been around way more dead bodies. Been the last person to see more dead bodies than I could possibly imagine, right? But he's also lost more dogs, found more dogs than you could possibly imagine.
And he's apparently some sort of a cat or kitten dealer.
Oh, he was a kitten dealer?
That's what it seems like from the ads.
Yeah, there were a lot of cats too. And
I can see giving away a cat in my lifetime, but multiple. And some of the ads, like one of the ones that Sam and I found, was posted on an anniversary of Diane Taylor's death and makes reference to what was it, Sam? It was a Manx and a
Oh yes.
I don't have that one.
So there's way more even beyond what we have here.
Oh yeah.
An interesting thing was, but the Manx and Calico ad was printed in one form and then it was corrected. And he had to call down and correct it. And the correction didn't change the content. It just changed a spelling or something.
The spelling, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say it's the same thing. There were 2 changes that were made into the ad that we have on the screen right now. After the first day of running, including misspelling the last name of Dave Vander Does, who's his friend. It was then in every other edition of the ad run, it was misspelled as it is here as VANDERSOEES. And then also, I think with counseling, the
2L.
spelling 2L's were in counseling and the I was removed in the change. So you have to believe that it's who intentionally changes their classified ad to make it wrong and more expensive. And
Right.
so, I think a lot of people who aren't.
Or if it was a typo, who's going to call the paper and fix it?
Right. Well, but the thing about it that's interesting is when I've seen changes in his ads, it's always changing from it being right, the spelling being correct, to it being wrong, which makes me sort of feel that he submitted it incorrectly because it's a puzzle. And then some kind copy editor at the paper is like, you misspelled counseling. Let me fix that. And then he calls in and says, no, I did that on purpose.
Right. It's incredible. I mean, and like you said, I had a job writing advertisements for Trade and Post and Auto Trader magazine way back in the 90s. And people could be very, very specific about what they put into their ads. And a lot of times you roll with it and you let them know you repeat it back exactly as they said. As long as you get the format right, you're okay. So,
did they specifically ask you to change them to misspell words, though?
Oh, no. They would not do that. But there were some things that just didn't make a whole lot of sense or probably wouldn't help them sell. But it is just one of those things, I think, as the writer, you're just kind of going, oh, okay, well, whatever.
Speaking of which, let's walk through a couple of these. Are you guys familiar with this one? The Found, German Shepherd on Snake River Avenue, followed by Lancet.
Oh.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, the Found German Shepherd one is pretty interesting because what we see is in the March 3rd ad when Christina goes missing, it's a lost dog. But this ad comes out, just 4 days?
There's another one. Yeah.
Let's see.
This one is the one you're thinking
of.
Yep.
So, and then when when on the anniversary of Chris and David's body being found, then we have a Found German Shepherd ad.
Yeah.
Something else kind of worth noting, like we said earlier, a lot of these ads are pet ads, either, dogs or cats. And from what we can tell, Voss had the humor of a 7th grader.
Yep. Yep.
He kind of has the brainworks of a 15-year-old boy. So if you kind of deduce this to 15-year-old boy humor, in a way, is it him calling these girls, bitches and pussies in a way?
Right.
Because all we see is dog ads. We see a cat ad. I even saw an ad for a rooster, which, again, 15-year-old boy humor is that, a cock kind of thing. So we do see a lot of this kind of immature through lines throughout his writing that you're able to kind of find where it's, like I said, it just kind of seems like a little boy in junior high wrote it.
Right.
What is the story behind this one? The significance of it. I know it was
because somebody bred Afghan hounds. Wasn't one of the victims or Voss himself involved in the breeding of Afghan hounds at the time? They were like a popular dog, I think, at that time period. I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. What's weird about this ad specifically is I believe 2 or 3 years prior to either of these ads coming out, he had an ad for a 6-year-old Afghan hound.
That's right.
Then it's in the paper as Afghan bitch, and now it's a 3-year-old dog, and he's charging $75 for a spaying fee. One would argue that 3 years old might be a little old to be spaying a dog, and some would even argue that the word bitch implies that this dog has been bred or it's for breeding, so why would you spay a dog that you are planning to breed? So there's that. But then it comes out again, and all of a sudden it's a free spayed Afghan female to a good home.
Interesting.
So it's interesting how after the dog has been spayed, it's no longer worth anything to him.
Right. And this one came out, what was it, on the 20th year anniversary of Christina White's disappearance, like right before or her birthday. That's
So the Afghan bitch 3 years old, that ad came out 3 years after Christina White had been taken.
Okay. So this one came out 3 years after
Or
something
had
had
disappeared.
disappeared, right? And then the Dome House, we'll get back to this one. And then there's this one that I found really interesting, which actually ties back to the Dome House. So, Voss, thought he was a genius. He created this Dome House for himself, but he moved into that Dome House, or it was completed in 1985. But then in 1987, he publishes an ad referring to a lost husky back in the Asotin area where he didn't live anymore. And I just found that to be so strange. But the stranger thing, there's so many strange things about it, but in each of these ads, there's a phone number that clearly links to Voss, and then a nonsensical phone number, either not linked to him or linked to someone else or something else. And then references to evenings and weekends, which I find very odd, because who has different numbers on evenings and weekends, or even in this ad? I don't know.
Yeah.
I find it's fascinating to me.
Also a brown husky. That just it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's just not a dog that is typically brown. That it sticks out. That was like one of the first things that occurred to me. It was like, a brown husky. Okay. I'm not saying they don't exist, but it's just not the common color variation that you tend to see with that dog. So,
and March 3rd is a significant date. Yeah.
Well, and this ad was the one where Christina's name appears in order.
Yes.
Right. The CH and
ISTINA. And then her last name also appears backwards in order. And that may just be, if you look through enough letters, you can spell out lots of things. But it's interesting that her first name does actually appear in order, and that the wording of it is.
That's a really good point, actually.
Brandon's theory was that this was supposed to be, in a way, like derogatory. So kind of decoded, so to speak, it reads lost Christina, brown husky, phone numbers, evenings and weekend. And so Brandon and I were kind of talking about it, and we were wondering if the evenings and weekend was, some sort of like maybe a clue or a hint that, because she went missing on, in the evening on the weekend. So, we were wondering if that was a sort of tell.
Well, and also in this ad, isn't March 3rd her birthday?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also my son's birthday. It's just sad.
But it's kind of interesting that on March 7th, you publish an ad about a husky that was lost in the Asotin area on March 3rd. It's got Christina's first name in it, her in order, and it's literally in order. And then it also has her last name in it. And I wouldn't really think of it as all that much of a big deal if I didn't go back and see things like this, where all of their names are in the ad. And it almost comes off like a clever game. Was he known to be a person who liked to play games or run tricks on people, or got any kick out of duping people?
Well, two things. Well, a couple of things. One, he was in the Navy, and so he may have had some coding experience. I did a little bit of research way back when we were first looking at these. It's been a while now, but I kind of got into looking at different types of coding. And when messages are hidden in words like that, it's called steganography.
Oh,
yep.
And steganography would have been words and letters that were embedded within messages like this. Was going to say something else about it, but I don't remember now. I do think that he was really active in Dungeons and Dragons in the 80s. And so certainly Dungeons. I mean, I'm the Dungeons and Dragons Club advisor at my school, and those kids are phenomenal, imaginative. They are not evil demons. But I do think that that imaginative and creative interest in the mysterious, his personality as well.
Oh yeah, I would agree that especially the early editions of D&D back in, in the 80s, definitely were very like a lot more hyper masculine. There was a lot more sort of like power male fantasy involved in sort of the very early days of D&D that he might have derived a lot of pleasure from doing, especially. So but that's a really good point though. And that, yeah, someone who's drawn to the theatricality and all that, and that, yeah, getting off on deceiving people or thinking you're getting one over on them. I think that is very much a driver.
Yeah. And to your points, by the way, like listening to you guys describe him, I kind of think you're describing that.
Duping delight. Yeah.
Yeah. You're describing that sort of like perfect personality for to kind of like get along and get ahead in life, right? We're describing somebody who is very confident. We're describing somebody who is ambitious, who's very sociable, who's inquisitive, who's focused on learning. But it seems like his weak spot seems to be in the whole, the last thing that he's sort of missing to be successful is poor impulse control. Like he is not, by any indication we can find, any sort of planner or somebody who values structure, order, predictability, or following rules or processes.
I mean, that's why he kind of sucked at being in the Navy, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But not only that, like if you just look at his job history, the man had more jobs in 10 years than I think most people have in their lifetimes easily. He had every job. It's like virtually impossible to keep track of. But it reminds me of this client I have. He's amazing. I've had him as a client for like 7 years. He's absolutely amazing. You might ask, he came in as a career coaching client. Why is he still my client? The guy can interview magically. He could get any job. He can write a letter that will get him an interview anywhere. He can't keep a job. He can't keep a job for like any amount of time. And I think some of it is because, it seems like Lance's sort of big flaw in being successful in other ways in life is really his lack of prudence and his lack of conscientiousness, which kind of, and I want to talk to Julie about this, is kind of the MO of an opportunistic person.
Right.
And, like a planner is going to lay a trap, pick a target, pick a victim. But there's we know from the research, there's certain kinds of killers who just lay a spider web, and they might have like 100 victims in their head as potential victims, but that when you walk into their spider web at the right moment, they're going to take you. And that part seems to also fit his personality too. But he was a mess.
Yeah, I remember.
He was a mess.
Yeah. I remember Gloria sharing a specific story. I can't remember who the person was, but it was somebody who knew Voss, I think, through the theater. But they were either at an ATM or a payphone, kind of doing their thing, getting their coins or whatever. And they turned around and Voss was standing there. And he like scared the crap out of them. And, just kind of like, what are you doing? And he was like, oh, gee golly, didn't mean to scare you, kind of.
Like he's kind of got a Ned Flanders thing going on.
Yeah. But what was like most notable to that person was like, how did I not hear this giant dude behind me? You know what I mean? He's like, what, 6'4", 6'5"? Like, how did I not hear this man? So for as large as he was, people noted that he was a very, very sneaky, quiet man. And I think that's like the scariest thing.
I was going to ask you guys, when you think of the different cases and you think of him and you think of his life now, what sort of stands out to you? And I also wanted to ask you guys just what your thoughts are on what you think might lead to a resolution in these cases.
Yeah.
Where do you want to start, with the first question or the second?
However you want to go.
Okay. Well, I think that a resolution, like I said earlier, I think a resolution might come if people are willing to speak up. There are people who know him personally, and if those people have the courage to come forward and provide, I think there's a really good possibility that Lance kept trophies, that he took pictures of his victims, and that if those exist, if there's some physical proof that he did these horrible things, that of course that would break the case wide open as well. But I do think that there are people who know things, and I would just impeach upon those people to think of the families and to think of the good that they could do in this world by saying what they know, by speaking the truth about the past, and bringing some relief to these people who have suffered for decades. If you know something, say something.
Do you
Right.
think you use the word courage, Cathy? Do you think there are, what do you think holds people back?
I think they're afraid of him. I think that he stands to inherit a lot of money, and I think there are people who are afraid that he could use that against them, who fear that he could do that to them or the people they love, especially if they're members of his family.
Mm.
I think, I don't know if you've seen the documentary Into the Fire, but I don't want to give anything away, but there's a woman in that documentary that I think she probably has some similarities. I think his wife probably bears some similarities, that she's been duped for decades, that she loves this man with her whole being, and that she could not be convinced that he did harm to anyone. And from the outside, it's hard for us to believe, how could anybody be married to someone who's been accused of being a serial killer and stay with them? I do think there are people out there that could.
Yeah, I think if there had been less evidence against Dennis Rader,
that they,
who,
for whatever reason,
Or if Rader hadn't messed up himself. I mean, he
he just wanted attention, didn't he?
Yeah, he kept writing that letter. He got busted.
Well,
but
there are family members of Boss who could come forward and say what they know, and I think it would take some courage to stand up and speak truth to power and say, enough is enough. I've kept your secrets for 45 years and I'm done, and I want to unburden myself. And I think they would be safe. I think there's a community of people that would support them in doing that.
Yeah, and I remember, and it reminds me of Dennis Rader, who, I don't know how many murders he was responsible for in the Wichita, Kansas area as BTK. But I do wonder whether, if law enforcement had not walked in with DNA and they had only walked in with, let's say, the writings they found on a computer disk, whether it would have been so easy for the family to say, yes, this man that, has his flaws and has his good parts and has his X, Y, or Z and has done these nice things for me, could have possibly done this. And it reminds me of Lance's stepson, Clint, because Brandon interviewed him, and Brandon asked him during the interview something along the lines of, and I'm just summarizing, like, is there a way that you could imagine with the right evidence you could believe that Lance did it? And he said yes. And I kept thinking to myself, it's going to have to be a videotape based on the way he's talking here. And I think it's really hard, because when you admit that someone you love or care about or perceive loves you has merely been keeping a secret from you for decades, much less that they did something horrible that you can't imagine to people, you're throwing away a lot when you do that. You're throwing away a lot of your life. And that is, even if you don't have anything financially to gain, you're throwing away a piece of yourself there. And that's hard.
Yeah. What do you think, Sam, in terms of any thoughts to add in terms of like how you think this could have resolution or anything else that sticks out about you about Lance that?
No, I just think kind of, long story short, just finding new evidence in general, whether that means, finding Stephen Pearsall's body, or if it means, finding a smoking gun, so to speak. I just think that new evidence, I think what we have now is so circumstantial that in order to get a solid, jury conviction, it's going to require some hard, tangible DNA evidence or, something really exculpatory like that. I do think, though, just to kind of comment on Lance, I just think personally, I think it's a little strange how long he's let this narrative go for. I just think if it were me, and I was being convicted or,
Convicted in the
people were
public.
saying I committed these crimes. Yeah, I would be doing lie detector tests. I would be doing the DNA tests. I would be answering the police questions. I would be letting them search my home. In the case of Christina White, I don't think the police even ever searched that house in Minnesota.
No.
I don't think they searched his house, and I don't think they searched Pat's house. And so I just think that his actions, to me, don't seem like that of an innocent man. They seem like that of a man who thinks it's funny that he's getting away with this.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we on the Snake River Killer podcast, we did a deep dive into the Wikipedia pages that are kind of covering all of these cases. And it said outright on that page, like, and I'm quoting the Wikipedia page just for all intents and purposes right now. They said, like, Lance did it. This is where he lives. This is who he's married to. This is his years in military. I mean, it was his whole biography. And if it were me, I would be, taking legal action against Wikipedia.
Right.
Like, that's defamation. You can't say that I murdered people if I didn't murder people. And his lack of action against those types of comments and against those types of pages and against those, you don't see him defending himself the way I think an innocent person should be defending themselves.
Right.
Yeah. And it's also totally possible that just simply over time an innocent person could give up on fighting back. But I do see exactly what you're saying, Sam. It's almost like, whether he is responsible or he's not, he certainly seems to be quite comfortable and almost reveling in being thought of as the guy who's the serial killer, because it's come at real cost to him. And I mean, He's joined clubs that he's been kicked out of. His wife lost a job in North Carolina because of it. It's not, it's clearly had a very negative impact on his stepson Clint's life. There have been like real costs to just not simply standing up. And even if he doesn't want to go on camera, even if he doesn't want to get an interview, you could release a statement from your attorney, but not even that.
And his own attorney that had passed away believed he did it.
Well, yeah.
Well, we're talking about, wrapping up this Lance part, and one last question for you ladies, or whichever one of you would like to take it. What do we know about where he is now? What has he been doing as of, what are his most recent movements that we're aware of?
I don't know how much I want to dox the guy.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
His information is searchable on the Google machine, right? We can find his address and phone number pretty easily. I know he's involved with a musical group in North Carolina where he lives, or has been involved with the musical group.
Yeah.
I know, I have heard, but I don't know for sure, that he has traveled to Idaho and Washington, that he has family that continue to live in the area.
Mm-hmm. I think he's living his best days.
Yeah. He's living out his retirement,
All indications that I've heard, Allison, are that he seems like a pretty comfortable, happy man.
Yeah. And I mean,
doing the things he's always done, involved in music and theater and libraries. And
He has a lot of things kind of working for him, and the complication aspects of this case being that there are multiple victims spread across several states going back 40 years or more, 50 years. And so
cross jurisdictional issues
Right.
in the Lewis-Clark Valley
Very
area.
much so. And so tying so many of these things together, I almost feel like if they're going to get him, they'll probably get him on one, maybe two. Maybe the Civic Theater case, that just seems to me the most missed opportunities that happened, where they could have gotten him. I think when we peeled apart that case a little more, I was left wondering how in the hell did he slip away?
Well, it's really interesting to me because I actually think it's the Christina White disappearance.
Yeah.
I think if they had put 2 and 2 together on the first day and gotten a search warrant quickly, that one could have been solved quite easily. But one of the things that Jackie said to me was, if with the evidence that they had in the first 2 days in Asotin, they could have gotten a search warrant. They could never get one today because legally, once time passes, your evidence, quote unquote, spoils legally. And you have to, you can't get probable cause for me committing a crime right now and then do a search 20 years from now.
Right.
You have to have some new piece of information. And on the Civic Theaters, I mean, he handed it to them.
Mm-hmm.
He walked in. And that's the one moment in this entire story where I wonder whether Lance was nervous. He actually walked himself into the police station afterwards to say he was the last person in the theater. So I think that there's probably a missed opportunity there. But I do think, including some of the detectives back then and Jackie now, and good Lord knows Gloria, they're
Right.
And these guys on the Snake River podcast, because I'm so grateful for you. I care about this case. I'm interested in this case. And I am so grateful that Brandon created the podcast, that you guys found him, he found you, that there's, Betty White is gone. She's died. And as these family members pass on, it's just wonderful to know that there are people like you guys out there who are going to continue to pursue this on behalf of them, on behalf of justice, long after Lance Voss will make it through natural life. So
I couldn't agree more, Jason. You said it perfectly.
So Allison, I have no idea what we're going to do on our episode with Julia, because I think we've probably both decided what our opinions are on Lance's guilt.
No, I mean, listen, I'm willing to hear her take on everything, and
we can fight about whether Kristen David was a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we'll be doing a lot of victimology in our talk with Julia, and seeing how it could all fit together, and obviously, anybody listening right now, if you have questions for our retired FBI profiler friend, please let us know. We can have those ready for her. But I just thank you, Cathy and Sam, so much for coming on to talk about this. I just could keep probing your brains even more, or really on any other cases that you're interested in, to be honest. So,
yeah. And really a round of applause for you two. I really do admire you. I'm impressed by how dogged you are. Nobody's paying, you to do this. No one is giving you giant accolades. And part of the reason why I wanted to have you on is that I know you guys contribute so much to the success of I want to say the podcast, but to the pursuit of justice in this case, which is beyond just the Snake River Killer podcast. And, I think you deserve a lot of credit, and you should feel really good about that. And I just want to say I admire you and appreciate you both.
Yeah. Amen.
Thanks for having us on.
Of course.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this true crime bonus episode with our awesome guests, Cathy Belben, Samantha Sawyer, and of course, my co-host for this series, Allison Dickson. If you'd like to join us and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including an awesome listener-run Facebook group that you should join called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations with me and other listeners like this live, you can join us on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you all again soon.